There is a moment most of us have experienced at some point in our lives. We are in a room, a meeting, a classroom, a team huddle, a family gathering, and someone speaks. They do not hold the highest title in the room. They are not the manager, or the director, or the senior partner, or the eldest at the table. And yet, when they speak, something shifts. People lean in. The noise quiets. Eyes move toward them. And when they finish speaking, the room moves in the direction they pointed. Not because they were told to. Not because they were required to. But because something in the way that person carried themselves, spoke their truth, and held their ground made everyone in that room feel, without quite being able to explain why, that this was someone worth following. That moment is not about power. It is not about hierarchy or rank, or the title printed on a business card. It is about something far more enduring, far more real, and far more transferable than any formal authority can grant. It is about influence. True influence. The kind that works not because people have no choice, but because they genuinely choose to follow. This is the subject of everything you are about to hear, and it begins with a simple but radical idea. The most influential people in any organization, any community, any family, or any movement are rarely the ones at the top of the chart. They are the ones at the center of trust. Think about the teachers who changed your life. Were they the principals? The department heads? The ones with the most credentials framed on their office wall? Or were they the ones who saw something in you that you had not yet seen in yourself? The ones who communicated in a way that made complex things feel suddenly clear? The ones whose classrooms you wanted to be in? Not because you were assigned there, but because something about their presence made learning feel like the most natural thing in the world. Think about the colleagues who made you want to bring your best work. Were they always your supervisors, or were they sometimes the peers who showed up with full commitment regardless of what the policy manual said? Who told you the hard truth when you needed to hear it? Who never stopped believing the team could do something great, even when the meeting notes said otherwise? Think about the friends, the mentors, the quiet figures in your life who shaped the person you have become. They did not have authority over you. They had something better. They had your trust. They had your respect. And in having those things, they had something no organizational chart can manufacture: your genuine willingness to move in their direction. This is the foundation of everything we will explore together in the hours ahead. Because the truth about influence, real, lasting, ethical influence, is that it does not come from position. It comes from behavior. It comes from the slow, steady accumulation of moments in which a person demonstrates, through what they do rather than what they demand, that they are worthy of being followed. This matters more now than perhaps at any other time in recent history. The world has changed. The old models of authority, command and control, top-down directives, obedience born from hierarchy, are becoming less effective with each passing year. Not because people have become more rebellious or less cooperative, but because people have become more informed, more connected, and more capable of choosing where they invest their energy and their loyalty. In a world where a talented person can find 10 other opportunities before noon, compliance is no longer enough. Leaders who rely on their title to get things done are discovering that the title alone is not doing what it used to do. The people sitting beneath them on the org chart may follow the instruction, but they do not follow the leader. And there is a profound, consequential difference between those two things. When someone follows an instruction, they do the minimum required. They comply, they complete, they move on. But when someone follows a leader, truly follows, not just complies, they bring something more. They bring initiative. They bring creativity. They bring discretionary effort. They stay a little longer, think a little harder, care a little more. They are not just completing a task. They are investing in a direction. And that investment only happens when trust exists, when respect is present, when the person they are following has earned, through consistent and credible behavior, the right to lead. This is what we are here to understand, and more than understand, to practice. Because influence without authority is not a mysterious gift that some people are born with and others are not. It is a set of principles, habits, and behaviors that can be learned, developed, and deepened over time. The pages of research in organizational psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science point to the same conclusion again and again. What makes people follow others has far more to do with how those people behave than with what position they hold. So let us begin at the beginning. Let us look honestly at why authority, real, formal, institutional authority, is often not enough. Every organization runs on a kind of unspoken agreement. The people at the top have the formal power. They set the strategy, allocate the resources, define the expectations, and evaluate the performance. The people below them are supposed to follow. This is the deal. It is written into job descriptions and org charts, and the implicit understanding that governs most professional environments. And for much of history, this deal worked reasonably well, not because people were less intelligent or less capable of resistance, but because the information gap between leaders and followers was enormous. Those at the top knew more, controlled more, and could see more of the landscape. Followers trusted that the hierarchy reflected genuine competence and access to information that justified the power differential, and so they complied. Not always enthusiastically, but reliably. That information gap has now been largely erased. In most industries, the people doing the frontline work often know more about certain aspects of the operation than the executives who oversee it. A customer service representative knows more about customer frustration than any executive reading a quarterly report. A software engineer knows more about technical debt than the VP who approved the product roadmap. A nurse knows more about what is happening at the patient's bedside than the administrator writing the protocol. Knowledge is distributed now in ways it never was before. And with distributed knowledge comes something that authority alone cannot easily contain: distributed judgment. People form their own opinions. They compare what they are told to do with what they know to be true. And when there is a significant gap between the two, they become resistant. This resistance is not simply defiance. It is actually a rational response to a fundamental human need, the need to make sense of what we are being asked to do. Human beings are not machines. We do not simply receive instructions and execute them without interpretation. We evaluate, we question, we measure what we are being asked against our own sense of what is right, what is reasonable, and what is consistent with what we have observed in the past. When authority asks us to do something that conflicts with any of those internal measures, we experience friction. We hesitate. We comply superficially while withholding our deeper investment. The psychology of this resistance has been studied extensively. One of the most consistent findings in organizational behavior research is that people distinguish, often unconsciously, between legitimate authority and authority that they perceive as arbitrary, self-serving, or disconnected from reality. They will follow legitimate authority because they see the value in the structure it creates, but they resist authority that feels like mere positional power exercised without genuine competence, care, or credibility. And that resistance is not passive. It manifests in disengagement, in quiet quitting, in the grinding slowdown of organizations where people technically show up but emotionally check out. We have all seen this. Perhaps we have lived it. The workplace where people are doing exactly what they are told. No more, no less. And the whole enterprise feels like it is running through mud. Where meetings produce decisions that no one actually acts on with any conviction. Where the leader speaks and people nod, and then return to doing roughly what they were doing before. This is the landscape of authority without influence, and it is expensive. Not just in human terms, in the waste of potential, the erosion of dignity, the slow suffocation of engagement, but in organizational terms, teams that follow reluctantly underperform teams that follow willingly by margins that are neither small nor theoretical. But here is what makes this even more interesting from a psychological standpoint. The failure of authority to generate genuine followership is not only a problem for the people being led, it is also a deeply unsatisfying experience for the leaders themselves. People in formal leadership positions who rely primarily on their authority often report a particular kind of loneliness. They can compel action, but they cannot compel commitment. They can create compliance, but they cannot create the aligned effort that makes great work possible. They know, even if they rarely say it out loud, that people are following them because they have to, not because they want to. And this knowledge, however, while it is masked beneath the trappings of position, is corrosive. There is also a more structural problem. Authority is inherently fragile in ways that influence is not. Authority depends on context. The moment the context changes, the promotion disappears, the company restructures, the project ends, the person moves to a different team. The authority evaporates with it. Whatever followership was produced by that authority evaporates too. But influence built on trust, credibility, and genuine connection is portable. It travels with the person. It persists across contexts. The people who developed it are followed not because of where they sit in the structure, but because of who they have demonstrated themselves to be. And that is a form of leadership that no organizational chart can erase. There is another dimension to the inadequacy of authority, and it lives in the territory of emotional experience. Human beings are not only rational evaluators of information. We are deeply emotional creatures whose behavior is shaped powerfully by how we feel in the presence of others. We have known this intuitively for centuries, and neuroscience has now confirmed it in precise detail. The parts of our brain responsible for emotional processing are deeply intertwined with the parts responsible for decision, making, and motivation. There is no clean separation between thinking and feeling, between logic and emotion. They operate together, continuously, in every interaction we have. What this means for leadership is significant. People who are led by someone who triggers feelings of threat, anxiety, or disrespect experience real neurological changes that reduce their cognitive capacity, their creativity, and their willingness to take initiative when a leader, no matter how intelligent or how formally powerful, makes people feel small, dismissed, or unsafe. Those people cannot actually perform at the level that is theoretically possible. Their brain will not let them. The threat response has engaged, and the brain's resources are redirected toward protection rather than performance. Conversely, people who are led by someone who makes them feel seen, respected, and genuinely understood experience neurological conditions that are deeply favorable to performance. They are more creative. They are more willing to share ideas and take thoughtful risks. They are more resilient in the face of difficulty. They are more committed to the collective outcome. This is not a soft phenomenon. It is hard biology, and it suggests that the emotional dimension of leadership, the capacity to generate positive emotional states in others, is not a peripheral concern but a central one. Authority cannot manufacture these emotional states. It can generate compliance, but it cannot generate the positive emotional engagement that drives exceptional performance. Only trust can do that. Only genuine human connection, consistently demonstrated and consistently honored, creates the internal experience that makes people truly want to follow. So if authority is insufficient, what does actually work? What is the substrate of genuine influence? What are the mechanisms by which one person comes to have a powerful, positive, and lasting effect on the behavior and choices of others? This is where the science and the practice of leadership become deeply fascinating. The first and most foundational element of genuine influence is trust. Not the thin, transactional trust of reciprocal self-interest. Not the, I trust you because you have given me no reason not to yet, variety, but the deep, robust trust that comes from sustained, consistent experience of someone's character and competence. This kind of trust is built slowly. It cannot be declared into existence. It cannot be demanded or manufactured through a policy or a brand initiative. It grows the way trees grow, through the accumulation of many small inputs over a long period of time, in conditions that are hospitable to its development. Trust, in the context of influence, has two essential dimensions. The first is competence-based trust. This is the belief that a person knows what they are talking about, that they are capable of doing what they say they will do, that their judgment in their domain is reliable. Competence-based trust is earned through demonstrated knowledge, through track records, through the visible alignment between what someone predicts and what actually happens. When a person consistently demonstrates that they understand the work, really understand it, at a level that produces results, others begin to trust their leadership in that domain, regardless of their formal title. But competence-based trust alone is not enough to generate deep influence. The second dimension is equally, perhaps more, important: character-based trust. This is the belief that a person is genuinely motivated by values that extend beyond their own narrow self-interest, that they care about the well-being of the people they are working with, that they tell the truth even when the truth is inconvenient, that they keep their commitments even when keeping them requires sacrifice, that their behavior is consistent across contexts, that they are the same person in private that they are in public. Character-based trust is the deeper, more durable kind, and it is the kind that generates the most profound levels of genuine followership. Research by organizational psychologists has found that people assess the trustworthiness of potential leaders along these two dimensions continuously, often unconsciously from the very first interactions. They are asking, without necessarily articulating it, does this person know what they are doing? And are they on my side? when the answer to both questions is yes, when competence and character align. The conditions for genuine influence are created. When either element is missing, influence is compromised. A highly competent person with questionable character might be respected for their skill, but they will not be fully followed because people cannot afford to trust someone whose values might not align with their own well-being. A person of impeccable character but limited competence might be loved, but their leadership will stall when the complexity of real challenges requires judgment and capability that they cannot yet provide. The second element of genuine influence is consistency. Human beings are pattern recognition machines. Our brains are constantly scanning our environment for reliable patterns because reliable patterns are the foundation of prediction, and prediction is the foundation of safety. We need to be able to anticipate how the world will behave in order to function effectively within it. When someone in a leadership position behaves consistently, when their words reliably align with their actions, when their standards do not shift based on their mood or the political convenience of the moment, when their commitments are honored regardless of whether anyone is watching, they provide their followers with something deeply valuable: predictability. Predictability might sound like a modest virtue, and in a culture that romanticizes charisma and dynamism, it might even sound boring. But in the psychology of influence, consistency is enormously powerful. When people can predict how a leader will behave, when they know that this person will tell them the truth, will follow through on what they said, will not suddenly change the rules to suit themselves, will show up with the same integrity tomorrow that they showed today, they experience a profound sense of safety, and safety is the emotional prerequisite for full engagement. The third element is clarity. One of the most underappreciated sources of frustration and disengagement in organizational life is ambiguity. When people do not understand why they are being asked to do something, when the purpose behind a direction is unclear, when the vision is vague or inconsistent, or changes frequently without explanation, they cannot bring their full commitment to the work. They comply with the letter of what is asked, but they cannot invest in the spirit of it because they cannot see the spirit clearly. Leaders who influence without authority are almost universally skilled at creating clarity. They can articulate where they are going and why in ways that are simple, compelling, and consistent. They help people see the connection between the daily work and the larger purpose it serves. They do not hide behind jargon or strategic language. They speak plainly about what matters, what they believe, and why the direction they are proposing makes sense. And in doing so, they give people something to align with, not just an instruction to follow, but a direction to genuinely embrace. The fourth element is emotional safety. We have touched on this already from a neurological standpoint, but it is worth dwelling on in its own right, because it is so frequently neglected in discussions of leadership. Emotional safety is the experience of being in an environment where it is acceptable to be honest, to acknowledge uncertainty, to raise concerns, and to make mistakes without fear of humiliation or retribution. It is the opposite of the psychological threat response, and it is extraordinarily generative. Leaders who create emotional safety do not do so by removing all challenge or difficulty from the environment. Quite the opposite. Environments of genuine psychological safety are often intensely demanding. What they remove is not difficulty but danger. The danger of being shamed for not knowing, the danger of being excluded for raising an inconvenient truth, the danger of being punished for experimenting and failing. When those dangers are removed, something remarkable happens. People think more clearly, collaborate more effectively, and produce work that is meaningfully better than what they could produce in environments of fear. The influential leader creates this safety, not through proclamation, but through behavior. They model the intellectual humility that makes honesty feel safe. They respond to bad news with curiosity rather than judgment. They acknowledge their own uncertainty and their own mistakes with the kind of openness that signals to everyone around them. In this space, honesty is valued over the performance of confidence, and over time, this behavioral modeling creates a culture, a shared set of norms and expectations that extends beyond any individual and shapes the entire group's way of operating. These four elements, trust, consistency, clarity, and emotional safety, form the psychological architecture of genuine influence. They are not traits that some people happen to have and others do not. They are behaviors, choices, practices, and like all practices, they can be developed, deepened, and refined. But before we explore how to develop them in practical terms, let us ground all of this in a story. Because the principles of influence come alive not in the abstract, but in the particular. In the specific, human details of someone navigating the real complexity of trying to lead without being in charge. Her name was Maya, and she had been with the company for 4 years when the crisis hit. The organization she worked for was a mid-sized logistics firm. The kind of company that most people have never heard of, but that, quietly, keeps enormous parts of the commercial world running. They moved things, goods, materials, packages, time-sensitive cargo, and they did it well, or they had, until a combination of technology failures, a key contract cancellation, and a rapid turnover of senior leadership had created a situation that the remaining team described, in the careful language of professional understatement, as challenging. Maya was a senior operations coordinator. She was not a manager. She had no direct reports, no budget authority, no formal power over the direction of any team. She sat in a large open plan office with 14 other coordinators and reported to a regional operations manager named David, who was himself new to the role, having been promoted 6 months earlier when his predecessor left abruptly. David was capable and well-intentioned, but he was overwhelmed, and it showed. He spent most of his time in meetings and returned to the floor with an expression that people had begun to privately refer to as the look. The look that said something had been decided above him. He wasn't entirely sure what it meant, and he was hoping that if he communicated it clearly enough, everyone else would figure it out. The team was struggling, not just with the workload, which had become punishing since the contract restructuring, but with something harder to name, a kind of low-grade despair, a sense that no one really knew where the company was going or what their place in it would be. People were doing their jobs, technically, but the discretionary effort, the creative problem-solving, the spontaneous collaboration that had once been a source of genuine pride, all of that had largely evaporated. People came in, did what was clearly required, and left. The place felt grey. Maya felt it too. She had joined the company because she believed in what it could be. She had seen, in her first 2 years there, what a high-functioning operations team could accomplish when the conditions were right. She had experienced firsthand the satisfaction of a team that trusted each other, communicated well, and moved through complexity with shared confidence. She knew it was possible, and she found the distance between what she knew was possible and what she was currently experiencing deeply, genuinely painful. She had no authority to change it. That was the situation she faced. She could not restructure the team or change the leadership. She could not alter the broader strategic problems the company was navigating. She could not force anyone to engage differently or communicate more clearly or care more about the collective outcome. All she could do was choose how she showed up, and for a long time, that felt hopelessly insufficient. The first thing she tried was something she would later describe as productive lobbying. Going to David with observations, recommendations, suggestions for how the team's daily workflow could be improved, how communication could be clearer, how morale could be addressed. David listened. He was unfailingly polite. He nodded in the ways that suggested genuine agreement, and then, more often than not, nothing changed. Not because David did not want things to improve, but because he was already managing more inputs than he could effectively act on, and Maya's suggestions, though sound, kept getting buried under the accumulating weight of everything else. Maya came away from those conversations feeling invisible, not dismissed, exactly, but not truly heard. And she began to notice something important about that feeling. It was the same feeling that her teammates were describing when they talked about the company. The same sense of speaking into a void, the same experience of having thoughts and concerns that seemed to dissolve without impact, like dropping stones into a fog. The feeling of being present but not seen, of contributing but not mattering, is one of the most corrosive experiences a person can have in a professional environment. And it was everywhere in that office. For several months, Maya managed this feeling the way most people do in such circumstances. She compartmentalized it. She kept her head down, did excellent work within her own lane, and tried not to let the larger dysfunction affect her personal performance. And she was largely successful by the narrow measure of her own task completion. But she knew, with the clarity that comes from honest self-examination, that she was in a kind of retreat. She had stopped investing in the collective. She had pulled her energy inward. And while this protected her from some of the emotional cost of the environment, it also meant she was no longer the version of herself that she wanted to be. The turning point came on an unremarkable Tuesday morning. Maya arrived early, as she often did, and found a colleague named James sitting at his desk, staring at his screen, with an expression of such blank desolation that she stopped in her tracks. James was one of the team's most experienced coordinators, someone whose institutional knowledge was genuinely irreplaceable, whose relationships with key external partners had been built over years of patient, careful attention. He was, in the private language of any good team, foundational. And he was clearly on the edge. Maya sat down next to him. She did not have an agenda. She did not have a plan. She simply sat next to him and said, "Talk to me." And James did. He talked for 20 minutes about the accumulation of small indignities and larger uncertainties that had ground him down to the point where he was genuinely considering leaving. Not for a better opportunity, but simply because staying had become more painful than the uncertainty of not staying. He talked about feeling like his experience was invisible to the people who made decisions. He talked about the exhaustion of trying to do good work in an environment that seemed to have lost its sense of direction. He talked about missing the version of the team they had once been, Maya listened. She did not offer solutions. She did not minimize what he was describing or rush to reframe it in more optimistic terms. She listened fully, with the kind of attention that most of us experience too rarely. The attention that says, "I am not waiting for my turn to speak. I am here, entirely, to understand what you are experiencing." When he finished, she said, "I hear you. And I think what you're describing is real. I've been feeling some version of it too." And then she said something that surprised both of them in its simplicity. What would it look like if we just decided to operate differently? Not the whole organization, just us. Just this team, right here. That question, born not from a leadership title or a strategic initiative, but from one person's honest engagement with another person's honest experience, was the beginning of something. Maya did not launch a program. She did not schedule a team meeting with a detailed agenda and a set of proposed solutions. She simply began doing things differently, one interaction at a time. She started showing up earlier and making a point of checking in with people genuinely. Not the performative, "How's it going?" that functions as social punctuation, but the real question, followed by the real listening. She began when she had information that was relevant to her colleagues' work, sharing it immediately and transparently rather than waiting for the formal channel that might not come. She started being honest about her own uncertainty and her own mistakes in ways that gently signaled to the people around her that honesty was welcome in this space. And slowly, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily and unmistakably, things began to shift. Not the whole organization, not the strategy or the structure or the senior leadership dynamics, but the micro-environment of the team, the texture of the daily experience, the way people talked to each other, the frequency with which ideas got shared, the willingness of people to ask for help and to offer it. Something was changing, and its source was not authority. Its source was one person's consistent, credible, caring behavior. Maya had not become the team's leader in any formal sense, but she had become, in the truest and most meaningful sense, the person the team looked to. Not for directives, but for orientation. Not for answers, but for a sense of how to navigate. And that happened not because she had been given something, but because she had built something. Slowly, persistently, and without any guarantee that it would work. This is the arc we want to understand, not as an exceptional story about an exceptional person, but as an illustration of what becomes possible when someone decides to build influence through behavior, rather than waiting for authority to grant it to them. Maya's story is not finished yet. We will return to it. But for now, let us look more closely at the specific behaviors that create this kind of influence. We have established that trust is foundational to genuine influence. But trust is an abstraction until we get specific about what actually creates it. What does a person do, concretely and practically, that causes other people to extend their trust? What are the behavioral building blocks of credibility? The first is follow through. This is almost too obvious to name, but its importance cannot be overstated. Every commitment that a person makes and honors adds one small brick to the structure of trust. Every commitment they make and fail to honor removes several. The asymmetry is significant. Trust is built slowly, through the accumulation of kept promises, and eroded quickly, through the failure to keep them. The person who says they will do something and does it, consistently, reliably, without needing to be reminded or held accountable, is building a track record that others notice, even when no one is explicitly measuring. The key word here is consistently. It is not sufficient to follow through when it is convenient or when the stakes are high enough to create external accountability. The genuinely influential person follows through on the small commitments as reliably as the large ones. They return the call they said they would return. They send the information they promised to send. They arrive at the time they said they would arrive. These small acts of reliability might seem trivial in isolation, but in aggregate they create a powerful impression. This is someone who takes their commitments seriously. This is someone whose word means something, and in a world where that has become rarer than it should be, it is noticed. The second behavioral building block of trust is transparency. This does not mean oversharing or broadcasting every thought and concern indiscriminately. It means being honest about what you know, what you don't know, and what you are thinking, to the degree that honesty serves the people you are working with. The influential person does not pretend to have answers they don't have. They do not project false confidence. They do not manage information strategically in ways that serve their own interests at the expense of their colleagues' ability to make good decisions. They share what is relevant, they acknowledge what is uncertain, and they trust the people around them with the truth. Transparency is harder than it sounds because it requires a kind of ego strength that many people lack. It takes genuine security to say, "I don't know the answer to that." It takes courage to admit, "I made a mistake in my judgment there, and here is what I learned from it." It takes a commitment to the relationship over the image to share concerns and doubts rather than maintaining the performance of confident competence. But when people do this, when they demonstrate that their commitment to honesty is stronger than their need to appear infallible, they earn a level of trust that no performance of competence can match. The third building block is genuine advocacy. People trust those who they believe are genuinely on their side, not in the shallow sense of telling them what they want to hear, but in the deeper sense of acting in their genuine interest, even when that requires difficult conversations. The person who gives you honest feedback, when honest feedback would serve you, even though it might cost them some social comfort, is demonstrating that they care about your actual well-being more than about your immediate approval of them. This is a rare and valuable quality, and people recognize it quickly. When someone advocates for you, when they give you real information, real feedback, real support, you trust them in a way that is categorically different from the trust you extend to someone who simply tells you what you want to hear. The fourth building block is competence that shows. This sounds obvious, but it deserves careful attention. Competence builds trust not merely by existing, but by being visible in ways that are relevant to the people you are trying to influence. A person can be enormously knowledgeable and skilled, but fail to build trust through competence because their knowledge and skill are expressed in ways that are disconnected from the practical concerns of the people around them. The influential person finds ways to bring their competence to bear on real problems that real people are facing. They help people solve things. They make difficult things clearer. They bring their experience and knowledge to the specific challenges the team is navigating. And in doing so, they demonstrate that their competence is not abstract but applied, not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of those around them. These four behaviors follow through transparency, genuine advocacy, and applied competence are the practical substance of trust building. They are not one-time actions. They are ongoing practices that must be maintained across time and context in order to create and sustain the deep trust that genuine influence requires. And this brings us to communication. If trust is the foundation of influence, communication is its architecture. The way a person speaks, not just what they say, but how they say it, the tone they bring, the quality of attention they offer, the clarity of their language, shapes every dimension of their influence. And this is where many technically capable people find their leadership stalled, because communication is not simply the transmission of information. It is the creation of shared meaning, and shared meaning requires more than clarity of content. It requires attunement, a genuine sensitivity to the emotional and cognitive state of the person you are communicating with. The first principle of communication that creates alignment is listening before speaking. This sounds elementary, but most people, in most professional contexts, are far more focused on what they are going to say than on what they are hearing. We listen in order to respond, rather than listening in order to understand. And the difference between those two modes of listening is enormous in its effect on the quality of the communication that follows. When you listen to understand, when you approach a conversation with genuine curiosity about what the other person is experiencing, thinking, and needing, several things happen. The person you are listening to feels it. They feel the quality of your attention. They experience, often without being able to name it, that they are in the presence of someone who is genuinely interested in them, rather than simply waiting for their turn to deliver their prepared message. And this experience of being genuinely heard is one of the most powerful relational experiences a person can have. It creates connection, it builds trust, it opens people to being influenced. Conversely, the experience of not being heard, of speaking while someone else waits impatiently for you to finish so they can say what they already planned to say, is immediately recognizable and deeply alienating. It closes people down. It creates the subtle but unmistakable experience of being treated as an obstacle rather than a participant. And it makes genuine influence impossible, because influence requires openness, and closed people are not open to being influenced. The practice of genuine listening requires several specific behaviors. It requires giving full attention, not divided attention, while also checking a phone or mentally rehearsing a counterargument. It requires asking questions that demonstrate comprehension and interest, not questions designed to redirect, but questions that show you are following the thread of what is being shared. It requires reflecting back what you have heard in your own words, so the speaker has the experience of being understood rather than merely received. And it requires tolerating silence, the pauses that allow people to complete their thoughts, rather than rushing them toward a conclusion that serves your agenda. The second principle of communication that creates alignment is clarity of intention. Every time we communicate in a leadership context, we are doing so with some underlying intention, something we are trying to create or prevent, understand or convey, resolve or initiate. When that intention is clear and honest, communication tends to land well, even when the content is difficult. When the intention is obscured or mixed, when we are trying to accomplish something that we have not named clearly, even to ourselves, the communication becomes muddy in ways that the other person invariably senses. even if they cannot articulate what feels off. Leaders who influence without authority are almost universally clear about their intentions, and they are willing to name them explicitly. They say, "I'm bringing this up because I care about the outcome for you, and I think there's something important here that might be worth examining together." They say, "I want to share a concern, and I want to do that in a way that's genuinely useful rather than just critical. Can we take a few minutes?" They do not hide their agenda. They surface it, and in surfacing it, they give the other person the information they need to engage authentically rather than defensively. The third principle is the relationship between tone and content. We have a cultural tendency to focus primarily on what is said and to underestimate the extent to which how something is said shapes whether it is actually received. Research in communication consistently shows that tone, the emotional quality carried by the voice, the body, and the overall manner of delivery, accounts for an enormous proportion of what people actually receive from a communication. The same words delivered with warmth and respect land very differently than those same words delivered with impatience or judgment. And in leadership communication, this means that tone is not a stylistic consideration, but a strategic one. The person who has mastered influence through communication has developed a particular quality of tone, calm without coldness, direct without harshness, confident without arrogance, warm without being saccharine. It is a tone that communicates simultaneously. I take this seriously, and I take you seriously. And it is a tone that people find orienting. It helps them regulate their own emotional state in the interaction because they have a clear emotional reference point provided by the leader. The fourth principle is the power of language to create shared narrative. Human beings are story-making creatures. We do not experience life as a series of disconnected facts. We experience it as a narrative, a sequence of events connected by cause and effect, by meaning and significance, by the ongoing story of who we are and why what we are doing matters. Leaders who influence without authority understand this at a deep level. They do not simply communicate information. They communicate context. They tell the story of the work in a way that gives people a place within it, a sense of why their contribution matters, a connection between what they are doing today and what they are collectively building toward. This narrative capacity is not about creating inspiring speeches or crafting elaborate visions. It is about the ongoing, daily practice of connecting the details of the work to its larger meaning. It is the ability to say, in natural and authentic language, what we're doing here matters, and here is why. And it is the ability to do this not as a performance, but as a genuine expression of what you actually believe about the value of the work. All of this communication depends, ultimately, on emotional intelligence, on the capacity to understand and navigate both your own emotional experience and the emotional experience of the people around you. This is the domain we need to explore most carefully, because it is the domain where influence is either created or undermined most decisively. Emotional intelligence has become, in some quarters, a bit of a buzzword, invoked so frequently and with such variable meaning that it risks losing its practical precision. So let us be specific about what we mean. In the context of leadership and influence, emotional intelligence involves four distinct but interrelated capacities. The first is self-awareness, the ability to recognize, in real time, what you are feeling and how that feeling is affecting your behavior. This sounds straightforward, but is genuinely difficult, because emotions often operate below the level of conscious awareness. We feel something: frustration, anxiety, excitement, disappointment. And that feeling shapes how we communicate, how we interpret others' behavior, and what decisions we make, often before we have consciously registered that the feeling is present. The leader who is self-aware has developed the capacity to notice this, to catch the emotional state before it takes over the behavioral response, and to bring conscious choice to bear on how they act rather than simply reacting from the emotion. The second capacity is self-regulation, the ability, once you have noticed your emotional state, to manage it in a way that serves the situation rather than simply expressing it. This does not mean suppressing or denying emotion. It means developing the internal resources to respond rather than react, to choose the behavior that is most aligned with your values and your intentions rather than the behavior that is most immediately driven by the feeling. Self-regulation is not emotional flatness. The emotionally intelligent leader feels things, often deeply, but they have developed the capacity to be in a feeling rather than ruled by it. To experience frustration, for instance, and decide how they want to express it, rather than simply venting it on whoever is nearby. The third capacity is empathy, the ability to perceive and understand the emotional experience of another person. Empathy is not the same as agreement. It is not the suspension of your own judgment or values. It is the cognitive and emotional effort to genuinely understand what another person is experiencing from inside their perspective, without collapsing the distance between yourself and them. This requires a particular kind of attention, a willingness to temporarily set aside your own interpretive frame and inhabit someone else's enough to really understand what the situation feels like from where they stand. Empathy is the foundation of genuine influence because it determines the quality of the understanding that underlies all of your communication and behavior. If you do not actually understand what the people you are trying to lead are experiencing, what motivates them, what they fear, what they need, what they value, then your attempts to influence them will be, at best, well-intentioned guesswork. The empathic leader does not guess. They listen, observe, inquire, and genuinely try to understand, and this understanding allows them to communicate, respond, and behave in ways that are deeply relevant to the people they are trying to reach. The fourth capacity is social awareness, the ability to read the emotional dynamics of groups and organizations, to notice the unspoken currents that run beneath the surface of formal communication, to sense the presence of tension, resistance, enthusiasm, or fear in a team or room before they have been explicitly named. This is the capacity that allows a leader to walk into a meeting and immediately sense that something has shifted, that there is a concern that has not been voiced, an alignment that needs to be built, a dynamic that needs to be addressed before the stated agenda can genuinely proceed. Social awareness is developed through sustained, attentive engagement with people over time. It cannot be developed from a distance. It requires actually being present with people, not just in the transactional sense of occupying the same physical space, but in the genuinely engaged sense of paying attention to what is happening in the room, reading the non-verbal signals, noticing what is not being said, and developing a sensitivity to the collective emotional state that allows you to navigate it skillfully. Together, these four capacities, self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and social awareness, constitute the emotional intelligence that makes genuine influence possible. They are the capacities that allow a leader to manage themselves well enough to serve others and to understand others well enough to lead them effectively. And they are capacities that can be developed. They require practice, feedback, and honest self-reflection. But they are not fixed traits that some people possess and others do not. They are muscles that grow with use. Consider what emotional intelligence looks like in the actual texture of a working day. The leader who is self-aware notices when they are becoming impatient in a long meeting and makes a conscious decision to bring curiosity rather than frustration to the next contribution from the floor. The leader who is skilled at self-regulation receives difficult news, a project setback, a client complaint, an unexpected complication, and responds with the kind of calm, measured engagement that steadies everyone around them rather than amplifying the anxiety of the moment. The empathic leader, hearing a team member express concern about a new direction, does not immediately move to reassurance or rebuttal, but instead asks questions that demonstrate genuine interest in understanding what specifically is worrying them. And the leader with social awareness notices, during what appears to be a routine status meeting, that two team members are avoiding eye contact with each other, that the energy in the room is slightly contracted, and that there is something unaddressed that, if not gently surfaced, will continue to operate as an invisible drag on the team's ability to function well together. These are not dramatic leadership moments. They are the quiet, ongoing choices that distinguish leaders who create genuine influence from those who simply occupy leadership positions, and they accumulate over time into a kind of presence, a way of being with people that others experience as deeply trustworthy and genuinely worth following. Now we arrive at perhaps the most fundamental principle of influence without authority behavior. Specifically, leading by example, not as a platitude, not as a management slogan, but as the most powerful lever of influence available to any person regardless of their formal position. The principle here is one that every parent understands intuitively, even if they sometimes fail to apply it. People do not primarily learn from what we tell them. They learn from what they observe us doing. They calibrate their behavior not to our instructions, but to our example. Children watch their parents more carefully than parents generally realize, and they absorb, through observation, through the lived experience of being in the presence of another person's choices and behaviors, far more than any explicit lesson could convey. And adults, in organizations, are not fundamentally different. They watch their leaders. They notice the gap between what is said and what is done, and they calibrate their own behavior accordingly. This means that the most powerful leadership communication you will ever engage in is not the speech you give, the memo you send, or the feedback session you conduct. It is the ordinary, daily, observable behavior you engage in as a matter of routine. How you treat people who can do nothing for you. How you respond when something goes wrong. Whether you take shortcuts when no one is watching or hold your standards when no one is measuring. How much attention you give the newest, least powerful person in the room versus the most senior. Whether your stated values show up in your behavior on a hard Tuesday afternoon or only in your communication on a good Monday morning. People are watching all of this, not in a cynical, surveillance-oriented way, but in the natural, ongoing, unconscious way that human beings assess the people who matter to their world. They are building a picture of who you actually are, which is to say, what you actually value, based not on what you say you value, but on what your behavior demonstrates you value. And the picture they build through this observation is the one that determines whether they trust you, whether they respect you, and ultimately whether they follow you. This has a corollary that is worth stating directly. The fastest way to destroy influence is hypocrisy. The gap between stated values and observable behavior is noticed immediately, retained long, and shared widely. When a leader talks about the importance of work-life balance and then sends emails at midnight and expects responses, people notice. When a leader emphasizes the importance of taking responsibility for mistakes and then deflects or blames when something goes wrong in their own domain, people notice. When a leader professes to value everyone's contribution and then consistently talks over certain people in meetings or never acknowledges certain contributions, people notice. And what they do with that noticing is recalibrate their level of trust downward and their level of engagement accordingly. Conversely, the consistent alignment between stated values and observable behavior is one of the most powerful trust-generating forces available to any leader. When people observe, over time and across diverse circumstances, that a person's behavior actually matches their professed values, that this is someone who holds their standards in the small moments as reliably as in the large ones, who is the same person when under pressure as when things are comfortable, who does what they say even when no one is explicitly checking. They develop a quality of trust and respect that creates deep, durable, and voluntary followership. This is why leading by example is not merely one leadership principle among many. It is the meta-principle that either validates or undermines all the others. You can be genuinely skilled at communication and emotional intelligence and trust building. But if your behavior is not consistent, if the example you set does not align with the influence you are trying to build, none of the other skills will produce the results you hope for. Behavior is the ground truth. Everything else is commentary. There is one more thing to say about leading by example that is sometimes overlooked. It requires courage. Not dramatic, once-in-a-lifetime courage, but the everyday courage of doing the right thing when it would be easier not to. The courage to acknowledge a mistake in front of people who might judge it. The courage to tell the truth in a conversation where the truth is not what the other person wants to hear. The courage to hold a standard when pressure is being applied to lower it. The courage to stand by a person or an idea that is currently unpopular, but that you genuinely believe in. This is the courage that leadership by example actually demands, and it is the currency in which influence is most powerfully denominated. We have spoken about consistency several times in the course of this exploration, but it deserves its own focused treatment because it is so frequently misunderstood. Consistency is not sameness. It is not rigidity. It is not the absence of growth or change or adaptation. Consistency, in the leadership context, is the reliable alignment between your values and your behavior across time and context. It is the experience others have of you as a person who can be depended upon to be true to their character, regardless of external circumstances. This is a distinction worth dwelling on, because people often confuse consistency with predictability of outcome or decision. They assume that a consistent leader always makes the same call in similar situations, or that consistency means being unchanging in your methods or your views. But this misses the point. What you are consistent about is not your decisions, but your values. A consistent leader might make very different decisions in different circumstances because they are applying the same values to genuinely different situations. What remains stable is not the output, but the underlying principle. What this means practically is that the people around a consistent leader develop a reliable map of that leader's character. They know what the leader cares about. They know how the leader will approach a difficult decision, not what the decision will be, but what values will be brought to bear in making it. They know that the leader can be trusted to prioritize certain things. Honesty over comfort, substance over appearance, people over politics, and this knowledge creates a profound sense of security. Even in uncertain times, even when the environment is turbulent and the specific outcomes are unclear, the people who follow a consistent leader feel oriented. They know what kind of North Star they are navigating by. Consistency also serves another critical function. It prevents the exhausting dynamics that emerge when people cannot predict their leader's behavior. In environments of inconsistent leadership, where the leader's standards shift, where priorities change without clear reason, where the same behavior gets rewarded one week and criticized the next, people develop a significant cognitive and emotional burden. They spend enormous amounts of mental energy trying to read the situation, to figure out which version of the leader they are dealing with today, to calibrate their behavior to an unstable target. This is profoundly draining, and it is profoundly damaging to both performance and well-being. Consistent leaders liberate the people around them from this burden. They create environments in which people's cognitive resources can be directed toward the work rather than toward managing the unpredictability of leadership. And this is not a small thing. It is one of the most significant gifts that a leader can give. Building long-term credibility through consistency requires several specific practices. The first is memory for your commitments, not relying on external systems to remind you of what you promised, but developing a personal ethic of treating your word as a commitment that you are responsible for honoring. This means being thoughtful before making commitments, rather than making them casually and hoping they do not need to be kept. It means following up on your own promises rather than waiting to be reminded. And it means, when you genuinely cannot keep a commitment due to changed circumstances, addressing it directly and honestly rather than hoping it will go unnoticed. The second practice is standards, holding under pressure. Every person's consistency is tested when external pressure, from above, from the side, or from the complexity of the situation, makes it tempting to lower the standard, to make an exception, to let something slide that your stated values say should not be let slide. The consistent leader makes fewer exceptions than their peers, and when they do make exceptions, they are transparent about the reasoning. They do not quietly abandon their standards when holding them becomes inconvenient, and the people around them notice this and build their trust accordingly. The third practice is acknowledging when you have been inconsistent. Consistency does not mean perfection. Every person fails to live up to their own standards sometimes. The question is what you do when that happens. The leader who pretends the inconsistency did not occur, or who reframes it to make it look like it was actually consistent all along, loses credibility. The leader who acknowledges it directly, who says, "I said I would handle that situation differently than I did, and I want to be honest about that and think about why," actually builds trust through the acknowledgement, because it demonstrates that the standard matters, that the commitment was real, and that this person is serious enough about their own consistency to notice when they have fallen short of it. We have arrived now at the second story. Not a new character, but an older one, Maya. Several months after the moment we last saw her, the change that Maya had initiated through small daily behaviors had grown in ways that surprised even her. She had not set out to change the team's culture. She had simply decided to stop waiting for someone else to create the environment she wanted to work in and to start within her own sphere of action, embodying it. She had decided to listen better, to share more honestly, to follow through more reliably, to acknowledge uncertainty and error with more transparency, and to treat every interaction with her colleagues as an opportunity to build something, rather than simply to transact something. The results were neither immediate nor dramatic. They were gradual and then, suddenly unmistakable. James, the experienced coordinator who had been on the edge of leaving, did not leave. He stayed, and he began engaging with the work in ways that had been absent for months. Two other coordinators, observing the texture of Maya and James's working relationship, the genuine mutual respect, the quality of communication, the sense that ideas were actually heard and considered, began showing up differently in team conversations. Something was being modeled that other people wanted to be part of. David, the regional manager, noticed, not at first, and not in a way that was particularly articulate, but he noticed that the part of the team that orbited Maya somehow produced fewer escalations, generated more creative solutions, and seemed, even in the midst of the company's broader difficulties, to have retained a sense of purpose and momentum that other parts of the team had lost. He mentioned it to her once, in a hallway, with the slightly puzzled expression of someone trying to understand something they cannot quite name. Maya said, simply, "I think when people feel genuinely heard, they do better work." David nodded and moved on, but something had registered. Over the following weeks, he began doing something that he had not done before, asking Maya for her perspective before making decisions that would affect the team. Not for permission, not because she had any formal role in decision-making, but because he had observed, through the evidence of the team's behavior, that she understood something about the human side of the operation that his own view was missing. And her perspective, when offered, was invariably grounded, honest, and useful. This is how influence expands, not through a declaration of authority or a formal assignment of role, but through the gradual recognition by more and more people that this person's judgment, behavior, and character are reliably worth attending to. Maya's influence grew not because she sought it, but because she built it, through hundreds of small, consistent, credible, caring interactions that created a track record that others could trust. There were moments of doubt. There were periods when the broader organizational difficulties felt overwhelming, when her private efforts felt insufficient in the face of such large structural problems, when she wondered whether any of this mattered in the long run. There were interactions that did not go well, conversations in which she misjudged the tone, or shared too much when discretion would have served better, or held a position when flexibility was actually called for. She made mistakes. She learned from them. She kept going. And over time, something crystallized that she had not expected. She began to feel differently about her own role. Not because her title had changed. It had not. not because her formal authority had expanded. It had not. But because her experience of her own agency had changed profoundly. She had discovered, through practice, that influence was not something that happened to you from the outside, granted by a title or a promotion, or the approval of someone above you in the hierarchy. It was something you built from the inside out, through the quality of your presence, the integrity of your behavior, and the consistency of your character. She had become, in the truest sense, a leader. Not a designated one, not a formal one, but a genuine one. The kind that people follow because they choose to, because their experience of her consistency, and her care, and her clarity has given them every reason to trust that following her is a good use of their investment. The kind of leader that no organizational chart can fully capture and no title can fully explain. The kind whose influence persists, not because of the position they hold, but because of the person they have chosen to become. This brings us, finally, to the closing reflection of everything we have explored together. Real leadership. The kind that actually moves people, that actually creates the conditions for remarkable things to happen, that actually earns the genuine willingness of others to follow, is not given. It is not conferred by a job title or a promotion letter or a corner office. It is earned slowly and persistently through the accumulation of thousands of ordinary moments in which a person demonstrates, through what they actually do, that they are worthy of being followed. This is both a humbling and an empowering realization. Humbling, because it means there are no shortcuts. There is no personality hack or communication technique that substitutes for the patient, consistent work of actually being trustworthy, actually being clear, actually caring about the people you are working with. The shortcuts that seem to offer influence without doing this work, the manipulation, the performance of confidence, the strategic management of impressions, produce a pale simulacrum of influence that collapses the moment the pressure becomes real. People see through it. Not always immediately, but eventually, reliably, empowering. Because it means that influence is available to anyone willing to do the work. It is not reserved for the charismatic. It is not dependent on the extroverted, or the assertive, or the naturally commanding. The quiet person in the corner, who listens with full attention, follows through without fail, tells the truth with compassion, and shows up with the same character day after day. This person can develop profound influence. The newest member of the team who demonstrates, from the very first interaction, that they take their commitments seriously and care genuinely about their colleagues. This person can become someone others instinctively turn to, long before any formal recognition comes. This matters because we are all, always, in situations where we have less formal authority than the situation requires. We are always navigating organizational and relational contexts that are larger and more complex than any single person's formal power can fully address. We are always needing to influence people who are not technically obligated to follow us. Peers, partners, clients, senior colleagues, family members, community members, the countless people whose cooperation and investment we need but cannot compel. In all of these situations, the principles we have explored together apply. Trust is built the same way whether you are a senior executive or a junior coordinator. Consistency creates credibility the same way whether you are leading a global organization or a neighborhood initiative. Clarity enables alignment the same way whether you are giving a keynote address or having a one-on One conversation with a discouraged colleague. Emotional intelligence improves your leadership effectiveness, whether you are managing a formal team or navigating an informal network of relationships. And leading by example is the most powerful form of communication available to any person in any role. The invitation of everything we have explored is not to become a different person. It is to become a more intentional version of who you already are. To bring more awareness to the way your behavior affects others, more consistency to the alignment between your values and your actions, more genuine care to the quality of your attention, and more honesty to your communication. These are not radical transformations. They are refinements, practices, daily choices that, made with intention and sustained over time, produce something that nothing else can: the genuine, chosen, voluntary followership of people who trust you not because they have to, but because they have discovered, through experience, that you are worth following. Consider the leaders who have mattered most in your life. The ones whose influence has actually shaped who you have become and how you work and what you believe is possible. Chances are, their influence did not come from the authority they held over you. It came from something more fundamental. It came from the experience of being in their presence and feeling, each time, that they were genuinely on your side, that they knew what they were talking about and had the humility to acknowledge what they did not know, that what they said was consistent with what they did, that they treated you with the kind of respect and clarity that made you want to bring your best self to the work. This is what we are capable of offering others, not the performance of authority, not the exercise of formal power, but the real, irreplaceable gift of genuine leadership, earned through behavior, sustained through character, and freely chosen by every person who decides that this is someone worth following. And when that moment arrives, when someone follows you, not because an org chart tells them to, but because your consistency has earned their trust, your clarity has given them direction, your care has made them feel genuinely seen, and your behavior has proven, beyond any reasonable doubt, that you are the kind of person whose lead is worth taking. That is the moment when real leadership is born. Not from a title, not from a position, not from authority granted or power wielded, but from the quiet, accumulated, unmistakable proof of who you have chosen to be. That is influence. That is leadership, and it belongs to anyone willing to build it.